Today, we're covering a story that recently broke on Capitol Hill. It involves a catastrophic midair collision, a divided Congress, a last-minute Pentagon reversal, and 67 families who traveled to Washington to watch history and instead watched institutional inertia win. We're talking about the ROTOR Act, what it would have done, why it matters, and why the Pentagon's alternative, the ALERT Act, falls dangerously short. Stay with me, this one matters. January 29th, 2025. Reagan Washington National Airport. American Airlines Flight 5342 is on final approach. Wheels about to touch down, passengers bracing for landing. At the same moment, an Army Blackhawk helicopter on a training flight crosses directly into its path. 67 people are killed. It is the deadliest aviation disaster in the United States in more than 2 decades. In the aftermath, the National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB, begins its investigation. And what they find is not a mystery. The Army helicopter had been exempted since 2018 from broadcasting its location to other aircraft. The FAA and the Pentagon had carved military helicopters out of the very system designed to prevent exactly this kind of collision. The technology to prevent this crash existed. It had been recommended by the NTSB since 2008, 17 years earlier, and it still wasn't required. That technology is called ADSB, Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. In simple terms, ADSB out means your aircraft broadcasts where it is. ADSB in means your cockpit can see where everyone else is. Had both aircraft been equipped with ADSB in, pilots would have had received a collision alert 60 seconds before impact. 60 seconds is an eternity in aviation. 60 seconds saves lives. 60 seconds could have saved 67 of them. Enter the ROTOR Act, the Rotorcraft Operations Transparency and Oversight Reform Act. Championed in the Senate by the Commerce Committee chair, it passed that chamber unanimously in December 2025. Unanimously. How rare is that? The bill then moved to the House, and that's where things got complicated. So, what does ROTOR do? At its core, it requires ADSB in technology in any airspace where ADSB out is already mandated. That's the crowded, busy, controlled airspace around major airports, exactly the kind of airspace where Flight 5342 went down. If you're already required to broadcast your location, the pilots around you should be able to see that broadcast in their cockpit. That's not radical, that's logical. Secondly, and this is crucial, the ROTOR Act limits the exemptions that allow military helicopters to fly invisibly through shared civilian airspace. It puts the FAA, not the Pentagon, in charge of deciding which military aircraft must be visible and when. The civilian aviation regulator decides civilian airspace rules. Again, not radical, logical. The bill has the support of the NTSB chair, Jennifer Homedy. The Airline Pilots Association, representing the pilots who operate these planes, supports it. And it has the fierce, heartbroken support of the families of Flight 5342, many of whom stood on Capitol Hill waiting for a vote they believed would finally bring accountability. They were devastated. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Is the flying public losing faith in the FAA? If so, the FAA has given them good reasons. This ADSB in technology, the same technology at the heart of the ROTOR Act, was first recommended by the NTSB back in 2008, 17 years ago. The FAA acknowledges the recommendation. They studied it. They convened working groups. They issued reports. And then, in 2018, to let military aircraft opt out of the visibility requirements altogether. No public announcement, no congressional vote. A memorandum of agreement quietly signed that effectively allowed Army helicopters to become invisible ghosts in the nation's busiest airspace. The traveling public had no idea. The pilots flying passenger jets had no idea. And 67 people paid the price. This is not the FAA's only credibility problem. The Boeing 737 MAX crises of 2018 and 19, which killed 346 people across 2 crashes, exposed the extent to which the FAA had effectively outsourced safety certification to Boeing itself. Congressional investigators revealed that FAA safety engineers who raised concerns were sidelined. Whistleblowers were ignored. The regulator meant to protect the public had become, in the eyes of many, a guardian of industry interests rather than passenger safety. Former acting FAA Administrator Daniel Elwell wrote a letter to House leadership opposing the ROTOR Act. Not in favor of doing nothing, he said, but in favor of doing it correctly. But here's the problem. That's exactly what the FAA and the Pentagon said about ADSB in for 17 years. We'll get there. Trust us. Let us do it correctly. And here we are, 67 people dead. When an institution fails the public repeatedly, when it makes deals with the military, when it slow walks life-saving technology for nearly 2 decades, it forfeits the right to ask for more time and more trust. The ROTOR Act doesn't ask the FAA to trust itself. It mandates accountability through law, and that's exactly why it matters. Why did the Pentagon reject ROTOR? The Department of Defense initially supported the ROTOR Act when it passed the Senate. Let that sink in. The Pentagon said yes. Then, the Monday before the Tuesday House vote, literally the day before, the Pentagon reversed course, issuing a statement saying the bill would create, and I quote, significant unresolved budgetary burdens and operational security risks affecting national defense activities. When reporters pressed a defense official for specifics, the answer was vague. The bill leaves out crucial, mutually discussed provisions. That's it. No details, no explanation. But here's the core of the Pentagon's objection, as best as we can reconstruct it from public statements by the House Armed Services Committee chairman. ADSB systems transmit location data over open, unencrypted channels, meaning adversaries could theoretically track military aircraft. I'll paraphrase here, that we don't want our enemies knowing where our bombers and fighters are. On its face, that sounds serious, but let's unpack it. First, the ROTOR Act applies to airspace around civilian airports. We're not talking about stealth bombers over contested airspace. We're talking about Army training helicopters flying circuits around Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C. Requiring a Blackhawk helicopter to be visible to commercial pilots during a training exercise at night might be a threat to national security, strains credibility. Second, ROTOR Act proponents, including NTSB investigators, explicitly refute the Pentagon's technical claims. They argue that the bill, as written, does not compromise classified operations. The NTSB's own crash investigators have publicly pushed back on the Pentagon's characterization. Third, and this is the most damning point, the Pentagon had already endorsed this bill. They had months to raise these concerns. They waited until the day before the House vote. As the families of Flight 5342 wrote in their statement after the vote, the bill was not defeated on its merits. It was defeated by 11th-hour objections built on misleading technical claims the NTSB's own investigators have publicly refuted, and a last-minute Pentagon reversal. When a powerful institution reverses a position overnight without specific public justification, and the result is the defeat of a safety bill supported by crash victims' families, pilots, and safety investigators, that is not a policy dispute grounded in evidence. That is institutional self-protection. And in this case, institutional self-protection cost the ROTOR Act its chance. So, what does the Pentagon and House leadership prefer instead? The ALERT Act, the Airspace, Location, and Enhanced Risk Transparency Act, put forward by the House Transportation and House Armed Services Chairman. Its proponents argue that ROTOR only addresses 2 of the NTSB's 50 safety recommendations, while ALERT addresses all the root causes of the crash more broadly. They point to things ALERT covers that ROTOR doesn't: a review of Reagan National's notoriously congested arrival schedule, air traffic controller staffing and training reforms, as well as broader FAA management changes. And to be fair, those are real issues. Reagan National is one of the most congested airports in the country. Air traffic control shortages are a genuine systemic problem. If ALERT addressed all of that rigorously, it would deserve a hearing. But here's the problem. The families of crash victims, the NTSB chair, and the pilots union all say ALERT falls short on the most critical piece: mandatory ADSB in requirements. ALERT includes ADSB in, but with what critics call more flexible implementation, which, in practice, often means more carve-outs, more exemptions, and more delays. The very same culture of flexibility and exemptions that produced the 2018 Pentagon deal that made the Blackhawk helicopter invisible in the first place. There is also a troubling institutional incentive at work here. The ALERT Act gives more authority over military airspace decisions back to the Pentagon. The same Pentagon whose training helicopter caused this crash. Critics argue ALERT loosens restrictions on military aircraft compared to current rules, making shared airspace potentially more dangerous, not less. And one more thing. ALERT has not been endorsed by the NTSB, by the Airline Pilots Association, or by the crash victims' families. The ROTOR Act had all 3. When you have a nation's top aviation safety agency, the organization representing commercial airline pilots, and the people who lost loved ones in the crash all aligned behind one bill, that alignment means something. It means the people closest to the evidence and closest to the grief believe ROTOR is the right answer. Where does this leave us? The ROTOR Act failed by 1 vote in the House, falling short of the 2/3 majority required under the fast-track procedure used to bring it to the floor. A majority of the House voted yes, but the rules required more. 35 members didn't even show up to vote. One of the most gut-wrenching moments of the day came from a man who lost his son in the crash. He told reporters, 154 days after a letter was written to the FAA in 2008 recommending this technology, my son was born. In the age of GPS-enabled smartphones in every pocket, there was no way for pilots flying an aircraft worth tens of millions of dollars to see whether other aircraft were on a collision course, What I soon learned was that this technology does exist and has for decades. His son was 16 when he died on Flight 5342. The NTSB first recommended ADSB in 2008. His son was born that same year. He lived his entire life in a world where the technology to prevent his death existed, and the regulatory and institutional systems failed repeatedly to require it. That's the argument for the ROTOR Act in its most human form. It's not about being prescriptive or mandating a specific technology for its own sake. It's about the fact that when voluntary systems, gentlemen's agreements, and regulatory flexibility have failed for 17 years and cost 67 lives, the answer is a clear, enforceable law. Not another study, not another working group, not another bill with carve-outs and flexible timelines managed by the same institutions that created this problem. The families of Flight 5342 have vowed to keep fighting. They're calling on House leadership to bring the ROTOR Act back for a regular floor vote, one where a simple majority can pass it. The Senate has already spoken unanimously. The pilots who fly our planes have spoken. The families who lost everyone have spoken. The NTSB has spoken. The only question now is whether Congress will listen, or whether this will become another 17-year wait while we hope the next disaster doesn't happen first. Thanks for listening to Dark on Radar. If this episode moved you, share it, talk about it, call your representative. The ROTOR Act isn't dead, it just needs a runway, and the families fighting for it deserve to know they are not alone. The mission of the Cirrus Owners and Pilots Association is simple: better, safer pilots. We promote that through our training objectives, which encourages following rules, using common sense, and solid aeronautical decision-making. Whether you fly a Cirrus or any other general aviation aircraft, your level of safety goes down, even when you're doing everything by the book, when there are aircraft out there that you cannot see with your eyes or electronically. I'm Chuck Halley. Thanks for listening to Dark on Radar.